Order. Order.
I beg to move that the House to now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Mr John McDonnell.
I want to bring the attention to the House to the dispute that's taking place at the National Gallery now. This has been the most extended period of industrial action at the National Gallery in the history of our British cultural institutions. And to be frank, it's time for an intervention from government and all of those who want to bring it to an end, so that we can bring both sides together before further damage is done to the gallery, its staff and its reputation. There's been 45 days of strike action since February by staff who have a reputation for their loyalty to their service. It is on the basis of the plans by the management to privatise two-thirds of the workforce, 400 out of the 600 jobs, which would be so damaging for the gallery and for the service provided to the general public. The dispute has been disruptive to the gallery's functioning and damaging to its reputation as well. During the periods of industrial action, most of the gallery's rooms are closed to the public, talks and education events are cancelled, and much of the gallery cannot function as normal. Morale at all grades of staff is at rock bottom at the moment, and that's been intensified by the gallery's decision to dismiss Candy Unwin, a senior PCS representative at the gallery. The gallery has so far refused to reinstate her, despite a ruling by an interim relief hearing that it is likely that she was unfairly dismissed for trade union activities. Members of the public... Certainly.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. There is a distressing trend that I'm seeing across public services at this time, with trade union activists being dismissed in the course of their duties of raising concern about their services. Do you agree with me that this trend seems to be escalating at this time? I think of the situation in Barts Hospital, where the occupational therapist Charlotte Munro was also dismissed, just reinstated this March.
There's been a series of examples of what can only be described as victimisation. I fear this is one of them. The Honourable Gentleman wants to give way.
Thank you for giving way. As he knows, the National Gallery is in my constituency, and I have obviously had a number of representations, and I'm very concerned about what he's said tonight, and I appreciate I have to get away very quickly, but I will have a chance to read his the full Hansard report. But it is also, I think, particularly regrettable because the National Gallery is one of the relatively early-going employers here in central London that is paying the living wage, something we should all support. And I hope that he'll give at least some credit in that regard, even though I accept there are some specifics in relation to the case that he refers to that are very worrying.
Certainly will. It was a campaign by PCS, the union, that achieved the living wage, but it was intervention by government ministers and others, the honourable member will recall, who actually urged employers to give the living wage in London. So it shows that interventions from ministers and others do work in this case. And all I'm asking for today is all of us to recognise our responsibilities to try and bring both sides together to resolve this dispute. Because, as he said, this is a national institution which is of such significance. 22,000 people have already written to Mark Getty, the chair of the Gallery Trustees, calling for the PCF's representative, Candy Underwood, to actually be reinstated. The Gallery's argument about this issue is that the cuts in their grant aid require them to organise a greater number of fundraising events and that they therefore require greater flexibility from their workforce. The Gallery claimed that the staff of their trading PCS have, and I quote, refused to agree any changes or to agree greater flexibility, and that therefore they have no choice but to outsource them to a private company. This is simply untrue from the evidence I've seen directly from the union and meeting with the staff. The unions put forward an alternative plan which proposes a new flexible contract which would guarantee the gallery all the flexibility the gallery needs, as well as being supported by the staff. The union has persistently asked gallery managers and trustees for the opportunity to discuss the alternative plan properly, which they believe has never happened. PCS has tried to engage in talks last year at the gallery and earlier this year at ACAS and continued to call for talks. The union has even carried out its own scoping exercise, which confirms that there would be support from the staff for their plan and that their proposals would guarantee the flexibility that the gallery require. The union is shortly going to be presenting their detailed proposals to ACAS and inviting them to organise an independent scoping exercise to confirm the union's findings with regard to the flexibility of working that will meet the gallery's demands. It's interesting, as recently as this week in Newsweek magazine, the outgoing director, Nicholas Penny, was reported, and I quote, as voicing a preference to keep the visitor services in-house. So I think there's a responsibility on all of us, including, I have to say, the Minister, that we encourage a resolution to this dispute to help get both sides back to talks before further damage is done to the gallery and its reputation. And I believe that we can help encourage the gallery and the union to find an agreeable solution that would allow the incoming director, Dr. Gabriel Finaldi, and the new chair trustees, Hannah Rothschild, who both take up their posts in August, an opportunity to heal the wounds of this dispute and the damage done by the dispute, and take the gallery forward with the staff in support of them. I know ministers are loath to intervene in arm's-length bodies, but the National Gallery is funded by the taxpayer, has national significance, and therefore I think this is a special case where ministerial involvement is required. Everyone was pleased, as the Honourable Member for the Cities have said, when the intervention took place that helped ensure the gallery overturned their previous refusal to pay the London living wage, and that will now be paid from the 1st of July. It certainly would be possible for all of us in the House today, including the Minister, to make a statement to encourage the gallery to attend talks at ACAS in an attempt to resolve this dispute. This has happened before in past disputes and should happen again today. The whole crux of this issue is that the National Gallery is arguing that it needs to raise additional funds through out-of-hours fundraising events. And it's an important part of their strategy to cope with the reduction in grant aid. However, everyone is now saying this should not be at the expense of the quality of the service the gallery provides to those who visit the gallery for free. In November 2013, the National Gallery and Board of Trustees agreed with this. They argued that privatisation would not be in the interest of the gallery, either for the quality of the service or financially. A document that they then was published by the trustees, I quote, said a well-trained and committed workforce in-house with a good understanding of the gallery's specific circumstances will provide the best quality of service for the National Gallery, its 6 million visitors, and all those who access its collections for education and enjoyment. There's no evidence at the moment that this doesn't remain the case. In fact, all the evidence shows that the privatisation so far and the outsourcing is leading to a reduction in the terms and conditions for staff and reductions in the quality of service that the staff provide. There's some evidence for this at the National Gallery itself. CIS, the private company that's been brought in on a temporary basis to provide visitor services and security, for example, have told their staff that it's not in their job to answer questions from the public about the paintings. This is a gallery. PCS believe that there's also been an increase in the number of complaints from members of the public about the behaviour of these staff working for CIS. Contrast that with the existing staff. The National Gallery's own staff are extremely knowledgeable about the collection and see it as part of their duties to inform the public about the paintings, where they're located, if they are off show for any reason, as well as giving information or advice if asked. This is a crucial service provided at the gallery, especially for those visiting for the first time or for those without specialist knowledge of the collection. Staff who to the gallery staff who have planned to be outsourced also include the information service at the gallery, those who deal with school bookings, support for school visits, and those who deal with complaints and freedom of information requests. The process of privatisation is going on apace, threatening all of this expertise that's been built up over generations.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. Doesn't he agree with me that it really is long overdue the government intervenes in this dispute in one of the jewels of our heritage, but also it's extremely short-sighted of the management of the National Gallery to seek to privatise public sector jobs in this way, because what will happen is what always happens. You replace permanent, stable staff who are invested in their work, invested in the museum, with unpermanent, insecure, privatised staff, and over time it must lead to a diminution of the offer to the general public.
Well, it's interesting because the companies that are now bidding for the taking over 2/3 of these staff jobs, the ones that have been shortlisted are security companies. CIS and G4S. And these are companies with a specialist knowledge of security, not of art, not of the gallery itself, not of its history, and certainly not of dealing with customers in this way, of people who want to come and see and enjoy the artistic talents that go back over centuries in this country. The National Gallery managers claim that they're only doing something that has already happened in other museums and galleries. That's just not true. There's no large gallery or museum that's introduced an across-the-board outsourcing of 2/3 of its workforce, including all the front-facing staff as the National Gallery proposed. This is therefore an experiment being proposed by the National Gallery in the face of widespread opposition from both the staff but also from the general public. 45,000 people now have signed a petition against the proposals. What's shocking are the costs involved already with regard to the employment of CIS. £1 million has been spent on this private company, effectively to use them as a strike-breaking force during this dispute and to avoid the current legal restrictions with regard to the use of temporary staff to replace striking workers. The company was first introduced when outsourcing was first announced in July 2014. The stated reason was the need for additional events during the Rembrandt exhibition. However, the gallery's own staff have covered all other exhibitions, including the Leonardo exhibition in 2011-12, which was even busier and with more extended opening. To be frank, if there was £1 million to spend in the National Gallery, it should be spent on ensuring that the National Gallery operates more effectively and to redress the 20% fall in the number of visitors to the gallery that has taken place over the last 5 years. But what's made this dispute, I think, even more bitter has been the victimisation that I've mentioned earlier. There's been a refusal by the management to engage seriously with the union on the alternative plans, but then to go further and victimise a PCS representative, to be frank, is despicable. Candy Unwin was a PCS representative involving helping lead the union's campaign against the privatisation plans. She was dismissed, what for sending an email to a union representative which included an estimate of the CIS costs and suggesting he request information about the costs from the head of human resources. Even though the head of human resources replied that the figure was entirely wrong, Candy Unwin has been dismissed for gross misconduct, since sharing this estimated figure was deemed to be a breach of commercial confidentiality. This would be farcical if it wasn't for the effect it's having on this PCS representative. An employment tribunal recently awarded Candy Unwin interim relief and ruled that it was likely that a full hearing would find that she'd been unfairly dismissed on the grounds of her trade union activity. The judge's ruling stated that it was likely her actions would be found, and I quote, not to be blameworthy, let alone gross misconduct. I urge the Minister to encourage the National Gallery to review their decision to dismiss Candy Unwin and to allow her to return to the job that she loves, in addition to allow her to represent the members of the PCS at the National Gallery itself. Can I also say as well, and the National Gallery has failed to carry out an equality impact assessment of part of the proposed changes and to meet their public sector equality duty under the Equality Act. This has been raised with the Gallery and with DCMS. The Government's Equality Office works from within the Minister's Department, but his department is claiming that the provisions of the Equality Act and the public sector equality duty do not apply and can be ignored. Staff protected under the Act, such as disabled and aged, are to be told that they have to stand all day. Women with childcare and caring responsibilities could have flexible working practices imposed upon them. Yet the union has pressed for 6 months now to work with the Minister's Department constructively in this area, but without success. Can I just ask the Minister whether he's actually comfortable about this, the equality duty being ignored in this way, and could he review the Department's decision? Why is this happening? I think, to be frank, there's a crisis of management at the National Gallery. If the director still claims, as has been quoted in Newsweek this week, that he would prefer the staff to remain in-house, if the Executive Committee and the trustees still believe up until the beginning of 2014 that outsourcing would not be in the best interests of the gallery, it might be sort of instructive to understand why there's been such a change of heart. Well, I think it's because of the crisis of management there. Over the course of 2 years, nearly all senior managers left the gallery, whether voluntarily or otherwise. 10 National Gallery directors and senior managers resigned, were dismissed, or left with a compensation package between 2012 and 2014. The gallery leadership style in response to the problem that they now experience appears to be to remove and replace personnel rather than tackle any of the issues that they have to confront. Once removed, staff have often been replaced by temporary advisors. Where do they come from? Well, let's give the example. This includes the employment of David Cummins, previously G4S security manager for the Olympics, as the gallery security advisor, who was then responsible for the introduction of CIS and the development of the privatisation proposals. A new head of human resources, Rosemarie Loft, was also employed at this time. This appears to reflect an absolute crisis of management at the gallery. I think there's concern right the way across the piece that actually, unless this issue is resolved, it will sour the introduction of the new director and the new chair of the trustees. There's been a huge campaign on this issue. Trafalgar Square only a few weeks ago was filled, not just with the strikers, but with their supporters, artists turning up to read speeches, poems, and to present artwork expressing their concern about this overall dispute. There's been an alliance developed right the way across those who receive the services of the National Gallery and enjoy it, and those who provide it. So there must be a way forward before further damage is inflicted, both in terms on the staff, on the reputation of the gallery, and the future of the service. This dispute is not going away because there's such a sense of grievance amongst the staff themselves, particularly with regard to the victimisation of their trade union representative. There's a view that there could be constructive talks immediately, which would find a resolution to this problem on the basis of the alternative plans that the PCS have put forward. It would not take much to get both sides together to resolve the dispute. So what I'm suggesting that we agree today, and I urge the Minister to back these proposals. First of all, from this House, we set a deadline today for management and unions voluntarily to come together within 10 days. We urge them both to get round the table to negotiate. But if at the end of that 10 days, if management unions have not entered into talks, I believe the Minister should intervene. It is his department that funds the National Gallery. It is his department that will be held responsible if the National Gallery's reputation and its service is damaged beyond repair as a result of this dispute. So therefore, if there's a lack of willingness by the National Gallery's management at the end of that 10 days to voluntarily meet with the unions, I believe it's up to the Minister then to force them to come together, to convene the meeting, to be at the meeting at the round table discussions, to at least plan out how the dispute can be resolved. This is too important a dispute for government ministers or individual MPs, particularly London MPs, to stand on one side. As has been said already, this is one of our national treasures, the National Gallery. 6 million people visiting it every year, something that we've cherished over generations, but whose reputation, I think now, could be severely damaged. I urge the Minister to intervene at this stage. I think all those of us who've looked at this particular issue thinks there's a resolution to this dispute if there can be serious negotiations. I think the onus falls upon all of us to ensure those negotiations take place.
Minister Ed Vasey.
I'm grateful, Madam Deputy Speaker, for the chance to respond to the honourable gentleman's debate, and I thank him for calling this debate on this important issue. It is obviously a very sensitive issue, and it has caused some emotion. Indeed, the honourable gentleman referred to the rally that was held at the end of May in Trafalgar Square, and I had the privilege of watching his speech on YouTube today, and I would certainly recommend it to all other honourable members. It was an impassioned and passionate speech, and he talked about how he was going to bring this issue to the floor of the House. He described the trustees of the National Gallery in respect of this dispute as being Philistines. He also used another word which I don't think I would get away with in terms of parliamentary language, but you can watch it on YouTube, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I'm sure you will after this debate. As the honourable gentleman has pointed out, the National Gallery does obviously, although it is funded by government, does operate at arm's length from government, and it is responsible for its own staffing arrangements. And what we are talking about in this debate, Madam Deputy Speaker, really are the National Gallery's plans, much needed plans, to modernise its arrangements. There is an ongoing modernisation programme, and the National Gallery are doing, I think, what is needed to provide a service that meets the needs of the public today. Of course, at its heart, the National Gallery has a duty to protect and preserve and curate its priceless collection, and also, of course, to preserve free access to its galleries. And I'm very pleased as a government we've been able to maintain free access to the permanent collections of our national museums. But it also, Madam Deputy Speaker, does have to provide a relevant service to the public, a public whose demands, frankly, have changed over the years. And visitors have different and high expectations of this gallery, and I want those expectations to be met. Because, as the Honourable Gentleman pointed out, the gallery is a great success story. It is the third most visited museum or gallery in the world, coming after only the Louvre and the British Museum. And as the Honourable Gentleman mentioned, more than 6 million people come through its doors every day. So the National Gallery needs to meet that huge demand. It needs to provide a good offer to the people who come to visit it, as well as an offer that matches their expectations on security and facilities as well. The current staffing arrangements, Madam Deputy Speaker, mean that the National Gallery cannot provide a guaranteed level of service outside of the restrictive set of standard hours, and that limits what they can offer the visiting public. The management of the gallery has decided that the ability to extend opening hours is necessary, and I agree with them on that. Under current arrangements, there is no contract guaranteeing the availability of staff for evening openings, and this means that for current Friday evening openings, for example, the National Gallery has to employ a completely separate workforce, and on occasion an insufficiency of in-house staff has led to the contracting in of external staff, even to cover exhibition openings or other evening events. And we also understand that staffing costs at the gallery are currently projected to increase by almost a third over the next 5 years, with no extra provision of service, which is a wholly unsustainable situation. Now, as has been mentioned, the National Gallery did engage with staff and unions for 5 months in an attempt to increase flexibility, to introduce new working patterns, and to guarantee a minimum level of service at the gallery at all times. And as part of that process, a basic salary above the London living wage was offered as a minimum for all staff. After this extended period of negotiation, no agreement was reached, and with the lack of an agreement, the gallery was keen to move ahead with the necessary changes. I have been assured that engagement with the union via ACAS has continued, and more recently the union was again invited to provide an alternative offer to the provision of services by an external provider. Though any move would see the 315 staff transferred to an external provider via TUPE, all terms and conditions of employment will be protected. There will be no redundancies made as a direct result of the transfer. I give way to the Honourable.
On that basis, then, the union has come up with its alternative plans, which management haven't considered yet, and wish management to go to ACAS to look at those specific plans. Would the Minister welcome that initiative? Because that would then bring them back round the table.
Well, I have to say that, Madam Deputy Speaker, that is new information to me, but obviously my understanding is that the National Gallery has made it clear to the unions that they would look at any alternative offer. So I'm not sure what the status of that offer is, and I haven't had a chance to hear the National Gallery's perspective. What I would say is the gallery is now at quite a late stage of the procurement process, and in theory, contracts for outsourcing a service will begin later in the year. But
can I get this clear, though? As a matter of principle, the Minister would welcome management and unions going to ACAS together, then, as a matter of principle now.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am a former lawyer, and therefore I'm cautious about what commitments I would make on the floor of the House that go beyond, as it were, the general principle that I don't think it's appropriate for the DCMS to interfere in the negotiations between the National Gallery and the unions. And given that there has been 5 months of talks, I would say that it's, in principle, a decision of the National Gallery whether it thinks the unions have come up with something that is qualitatively different from offers that have been made before, to decide whether it's appropriate, therefore, to re-engage in any talks. But I would say that I won't give away for a third time if the Honourable Gentleman will bear with me. I'll just make a couple of extra points, and then perhaps there'll be time for me to give way again. But if the modernisation programme goes ahead, the gallery can extend its opening hours, guaranteed provision of, for extended evening openings on Fridays and indeed on weekends, which is when a lot of people now wish to visit galleries, and for special events as well. And of course that will lead to increased income for the gallery, but I think even more importantly it will make the gallery relevant to a whole new group of visitors, because that is really what attracts people more and more. And I think as many as 5,000 visitors do attend some of these late events. The gallery has also introduced a great new membership scheme with 20,000 members as well, so it is making great strides to increase its income, and it will allow it to be more resilient. I have to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that it is my understanding that staff will benefit from this modernisation programme. The previous Culture Secretary, my right honourable friend, the member for Bromsgrove, did work with the National Gallery to ensure that they're in a suitable situation to supply the London living wage to all staff. And indeed, that London living wage will come in for all staff in the National Gallery next week. And that is something that I think all of us should welcome. And I think it is indeed the first national museum to introduce the London living wage for all its staff. I do understand the new incoming director, Gabrielle Finaldi, as well as the new chairman of trustees, Hannah Rothschild, are aware of the situation. Miss Rothschild has, of course, been a member of the board that took the decision to outsource staffing services as part of the modernisation programme. But I do think as well it's important to make the point that I do not think this process is being rushed through. I think this is the appropriate time to give way for the third time to the honourable gentleman.
It is just returning to this point, just to get the Minister's view exactly clear. Surely he would welcome this to be resolved through negotiation and talks, and therefore would welcome and urge all sides to get together for those talks at this stage.
Well, I think at some point the National Gallery has to take a decision to move on, and my understanding that they did ask the unions to come up with an alternative offer by the 8th of June. That deadline was not met, and that deadline was, as I understand it, an agreement between ACAS, the PCS and the National Gallery. But as I say, it is not my intention to tell the National Gallery what it should do. I think, as I've said, this process has not been rushed. There has been a great deal of engagement in the process with the union. The honourable gentleman did talk about the individual who has left the gallery. That is obviously a legal process, as was made clear in the honourable gentleman's remarks, and the National Gallery have acted in line with the judge's orders to this point in ensuring no detriment is suffered pending the tribunal in October, but of course it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment on a case that is currently effectively sub judice. I think we can all agree in this House, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the National Gallery is a fantastic institution, a truly world-class permanent collection owned by the public of this nation. I fully support the National Gallery's move.
As far as I'm aware, he's received his briefing from the National Gallery. We'll happily provide him a briefing from the union so he can get a more balanced view of this matter. But as far as I'm aware, the alternative plan has not been considered by the management itself. He tells us that there was a deadline by the 8th of June. I know no deadline as such, but we're talking about a matter of a fortnight. So therefore, alternative proposals have been put by the staff that could resolve this dispute. Doesn't he think, in the interests of the long-term interests of the gallery, at this stage, management and union should be urged to get together to consider this alternative plan, if it at least then enables a way forward for the new director and the new chair trustees to take the gallery forward to a long-term future in the interests of all those who cherish the gallery?
Well, as I think I have made clear a number of times during this important debate, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think it is, from what I know about the dispute, that the National Gallery has engaged extensively with the union to seek a way forward. We know what the aim of the National Gallery is, which is to modernise its working practices to take account of the desires and needs of visitors in the 21st century. And I support, as I say, the National Gallery's modernisation programme. I think the National Gallery is a fantastic institution, and I support, in particular, the introduction of the London living wage coming in next week.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many of that opinion, say aye. Aye. On the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order! Order!
House of Commons sound. 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 House of Commons sound.